Hello and welcome to a start collecting video for Haqqislam. This is the second in the start collecting series where we go through how to actually start buying into and building your collection for a faction, and this video comes courtesy of a request by channel supporter Zero Heretic, who asked for Haqqislam or any of its sectorals to be covered. So in start collecting videos, what we talk about are how to buy into the beginning of a collection for that faction, with a focus on specifically what you're getting in each of the boxes you buy and why it's a good purchase. We talk about what you get in the box, what's good about it, and also a bit of a focus on what are some conversion or in particular proxy opportunities. One of the really important things to emphasize about Infinity is that it has a quite permissive proxy culture. This comes from a long history of not every single profile having a model that's available, and even in N5, the simple fact of the matter is that many of the armies that are available to play don't have full collections available for purchase. That means that when we play Infinity, as long as the models that we're using are intelligible and comprehensible by our opponents, and we keep our opponents well informed, there's quite a lot of ability to use one thing as another within some reason. So as we go through and look at how I would put together a Haqqislam force, we'll talk about where some of the cases are where one model might serve really well as a proxy for another. Along the way, we'll look at two different lists at different stages of the collection using the models that we've bought, and then we'll wrap up by looking at how we might continue the collection from there. We'll be starting with vanilla Haqqislam, but we will talk about how you might shift toward a sectoral at the end of the video. And finally, just to note, this is how I would start building the faction. So there is a focus on getting to competitive lists that I think I would be comfortable playing at an event at about a reasonable a cost as possible. For some factions, that's easier than others, but happily, for Haqqislam, as we'll see, actually there's a pretty solid path towards a very nice list quite early in the case. So let's look at how we'd get there. Now, our buy-in for Haqqislam starts with 4 purchases, 3 boxes, and a blister, and the blister pack is Saladin. I've mentioned him first just to really absolutely emphasize that he should be in your initial collection. It's just a blister pack. It's a relatively lightweight purchase, and Saladin is a defining faction strength for vanilla Haqqislam. We really want him in our collection. And just to note that while he will be our lieutenant in the majority of our starting lists, it's worth experimenting with other lieutenant choices over time, and even as we segue into other sectorals out of vanilla, in the later stages of the collection, Saladin makes just an outstanding HVT model. It's an incredible sculpt that oozes style, so we will basically always get some use from him, and that's why he's basically our first purchase. Now, from here, yes, we're going to actually need some troops for him to lead, and that means we're going to be buying into an action pack. There are 2 Haqqislam action packs that you can purchase. One of them is the generic Haqqislam action pack, and one of them is the Hassassin Baram action pack. And I'm actually going to suggest in this case that we go with the Hassassin Baram action pack. This is for a couple of reasons, but really the most significant one is just that they are newer sculpts. If you're buying into a faction, that's just a nice quality of life thing to have. More recent sculpts generally, not universally, but generally tend to go together a little bit easier. They tend to have nicer connection points. And while basically anything Corvus Belli has produced in the last 5 to 8 years looks really good, these ones I think are really nice beginnings to a collection. Pretty much all of these sculpts I like. It helps that they also translate really well, despite the fact that we're buying Hassassin Baram as an action pack, these translate really well into vanilla. Almost all of these models are actually just usable directly in vanilla. Only the Hassassin Shujay in the bottom right isn't just actively usable as a vanilla profile. And even if we can't use the Hassassin Shujay in vanilla, that cool model with the cloak and the knife makes an excellent proxy for basically any kind of badass. In particular, Hassassin for days would be very ably proxied by that model, but any skirmisher you could really easily use him as. In addition, even though we can use every single one of these profiles bar the Shujay as is, in a vanilla Haqqislam list, there's also some interesting options for proxying. In particular, the Hassassin Muyyib with Spitfire, that's center to the right, makes a very good proxy for a Mukhtar active response unit, Red Fury, and the Hassassin Lasik, that's the bottom left with the viral sniper rifle, makes an excellent profile for any sniper model, and as you'll see in a number of the lists that follow, we're going to be using her as Nauf. But otherwise, All three Dalami are directly usable in Haqqislam. The Sundukbut and the Bokta. The Sundukbut is the boxy-looking robot, and the Bokta is the jump pack-looking heavy infantry. Both of those are very directly usable in Haqqislam. The Hassassin Nadir, that's the most central model with the submachine gun with underslung Panzerfaust. Thing is very usable in Haqqislam, and the Hassassin Barid, that's the model in the hacker pose, is again directly usable in Haqqislam. So all of this translates very well into the beginning of a Haqqislam army, and as we're going to see, gives us a little bit of an off-ramp into Assassins in future, if that's something that we're interested in. Continuing that theme, our second box is going to be a box of Ghazi Mutawiya, and we will use all four of these troopers with no proxies. We get in this box 4 Ghazi Mutawiya, armed with a mix of weapons, but most importantly there are 2 with jammers, and then there's one with a boarding shotgun and one with a chain rifle. The jammers will basically always have to be used as models that are holding jammers, but that's totally fine because that's what we want Ghazi Mutawiya for. And then the shotgun and the chain rifle are relatively flexible. There are a number of profiles that they can be. Particularly combined with Saladin, who is a lieutenant with inspiring leadership. These are irregular troopers that become regular and are a source of smoke grenades and key defensive toolbox. And with Saladin are also just a source of excellent regular orders that will stay alive for much of the game and generally be slightly annoying to your opponent. Coincidentally, these are also Hassassin Baram troopers, so we're just continuing to leave ourselves the options of being able to expand out into Hassassin Baram in future. Although to note, at this point, without Saladin, our collection includes an awful lot of irregular troopers. And so just when you're thinking about if you might expand to Hassassin Baram in future, you want to give some consideration to just how you'll manage that and models that you'll want to buy to actually give you some regulars. But in in Haqqislam, we're very well set to have most of the core of our army together at this point with just one more box to buy. And so the third and final box and fourth overall purchase for our initial buy-in is going to be the Nazarova twins. As with the Ghazi Mutawiya and actually most of the Hassassin Baram action pack, we'll be using these as are. These are yet another pair of irregular troopers, but because they're mounted on motorcycles, they are extremely fast and extremely dangerous. They're very good tip of the spear pieces that can very quickly punch into the midfield and even into your opponent's deployment zone and do a lot of damage very cheaply because they're not expensive, because they're irregular warbands. Of the two of them, Zuleika, that's the one with the pistols, is the one that you'll use more often, but we'll be using both of these in our initial list because they're both totally fine. Just as the Daylami from the action pack and the Mutawiya from the Mutawiya box give us our cheap and solid defensive pieces, these are our cheap and solid offensive pieces, which lets us put together a list that's actually really solid off of just these 4 initial purchases. And so this is our sample list after 4 purchases, 3 boxes and a blister pack, and frankly I would play this at an event. Something that surprised me as I was putting this together is actually just how few proxies we really need, with only 2 proxies in this entire force, and both of them really easy to understand. So from the top, we've got 2 combat groups. At this stage, they're just split into a 10 and 5 split, just built to be easy to play, but as you get good with using Saladin, you'll also want to learn how to use his Strategos levels 2 to move things easily between combat groups, and in particular something that you might choose to do in many of your games with this list is to begin each round by thinking about whether or not you have unused orders in combat group 2, and if there's anything in combat group 1 that you might shift down into group 2 to take advantage of that. For example, if you're beginning the game and you're ready to really hoe into an opponent, and you think they've null deployed and don't have good ARO defenses put up, you might choose to move Zamira into combat group 2 so you can really aggressively attack with both Zamira and Zuleika on the first turn. So from the top we've got Saladin. Yes, he's our lieutenant. 39 points isn't cheap, but frankly he's probably the best lieutenant in the entire game. He's got Strategos and Counterintelligence and an extra command token and Inspiring Leadership, and Inspiring Leadership is the key to making this list work. We're trading very heavily on irregular pieces, which are a little bit discounted, and relying on Saladin's Inspiring Leadership to make them all regular. This does mean there is some risk with this list. If Saladin dies, you're basically going to spend the entire rest of the game in a loss of lieutenant state, so don't let him die. Because he has Strategos, he has 2 reserve drops, and if you're going second, much of the time one of them should be him. You just don't want him ever to be in a situation where he is anything less than as safe as possible, because it's absolutely critical that he stays alive. He's kind of hard to kill. He's a no wound incapacitation trooper. He has a means of defending himself. His defensive stats aren't terrible. But you still want him defended as heavily as possible and in a location that is as safe as possible from your opponent. Next, we have our first of 2 proxies. We are running a Mukhtar MSV2 Red Fury. We're going to be using the Moyib with the Spitfire as the Mukhtar with the Red Fury. Those 2 models will be very translatable to one another. A Red Fury and a Spitfire are the same kind of gun, and the Moyib's helmet actually just already looks kind of like it's got a visor. If you wanted to, you could do a little bit of paintwork there, maybe make the visor glow or something. But while a Moyib Spitfire is a pretty mediocre profile for our purposes, the Mukhtar is very useful. There is loads of smoke in this list, and the Mukhtar has an MSV2, so it can see through it, and it's durable itself with no wound incapacitation, and it's got mimetism, so when it spools up through a smoke grenade, the opponent that doesn't have any smoke, doesn't have any inability to shoot back through the smoke, is suffering really significant penalties, usually -9 straight out the bat. If they've got +3 for range, but -3 for cover, they're also taking -3 for mimetism and -6 for trying to shoot back through smoke. That lets the Mukhtar really bully things like total reaction bots, and is a great addition to the list. We're then using the Boktar FTO just as is. This is the Red Fury Boktar, which is what the model in the box I believe is armed with. And she has some of the same qualities of the Mukhtar. She's actually a 2-wound heavy infantry. She's got an MSV1 rather than MSV2. She's much more expensive, but the reason why she's much more expensive is that she's very, very fast. Unlike the Mukhtar, who is 6-2 move, she is 6-2 move but with super jump, jet propulsion, and tactical awareness. And those 2 things combine to just propel her around the field and get firing angles that are really strong. Now, in Haqqislam Baram, she's quite good, but an expensive piece. She's a little bit difficult to afford, but in this case, Saladin plus all of the irregulars is subsidizing her, and so we're able to actually get some solid vanity pick pieces in this list and make them work just fine. Our next 2 pieces are Zamira and Zuleika, excellent offensive elements who can be played as moderately disposable and rushed into the midfield or opponent's deployment zone to attack. And then we've got a collection of camouflage markers. This list will be deploying 4 camouflage markers with mimetism 0 or with no mimetism. And what we'll be doing here is it will be using 2 Delami with light shotguns and Panzerfaust, infiltration and camouflage, and a Sundukbut with neurokinetics and an AP Spitfire and light shotgun to build this defensive web in the midfield that will punish anything that tries to push through it. One of the really nice things about the Sundukbut and the Dalami in combination is that they all share the same kind of mimetism. The Sundukbut has a decoy camouflage marker as well, and so your opponent will probably know that, yeah, there's some things under that. There's going to be some Dalamis and probably a Sundukbut under there if they're canny about availability, because Dalami are only availability 3 in Haqqislam. But provided you deploy those camouflage markers so that they are all sharing the same states, i.e. they're not all prone or all standing, or rather, sorry, they are all prone or all standing, and you've got some of them within 8 inches of the other, your opponent won't really be sure what is what, and that lets you do things like use the Sundukbut's decoy as if it were a Dalami, or position 2 Dalami as if they were a Sundukbut, and just make it difficult for your opponent to know what they're dealing with as they push forward. We've got a Hassassin Barid, regular hacking device with a rifle and a pitcher. This is just so we have some hacking in the list. Frankly, we don't have many repeaters. Saladin himself is a repeater, but we are not going to be pushing him forward to make use of that. But just having some hacking tends to be vaguely useful, and the Barid can use its pitcher to extend the hacking area a little bit, just to combine with our defensive ability. One thing that is nice to know is that Saladin, although he's a Strategos, which lets him just turn his Lieutenant Order into a regular order, he can also keep his Lieutenant Order and use it as a free coordinated order every round. What that tends to be really good for is doing a coordinated move plus shoot with a bunch of targetless weapons, mostly to lay down smoke grenades where you need them to launch attacks, but you can combine a Barid as part of that and just fire its pitcher off somewhere kind of for free. Try and do that twice during a game, and you'll get a pitcher out somewhere that will be a little bit annoying. Again, the Barid mostly is a cheap specialist and a little bit of extra defense. Don't expect enormous things. The last model in this combat group is the first of 4 Matalia. This one is just a chain rifle and smoke grenades, and we'll be using it either to maybe do a little bit of attacking, but mostly just be part of those coordinated orders and lay down smoke, and otherwise be a dogged defensive piece with a chain rifle. In Combat Group 2, we've got Nauf. This is the second proxy. Nauf is being proxied by the wonderful Lasik model. And Nav's filling a kind of important role in this list because one of the things you'll note otherwise is that we're a little short on dangerous active turn firepower in terms of things that can punch through armor. The Sundukbut is a neurokinetics model, so it's reactive only. The Dalami have Panzerfaust, but we don't really want to use those as active turn weapons. And the Mukhtar and the Bokhtar are both Red Furies, which are low damage, just high burst and good mods. We want something that can threaten moderately higher targets, and we want something with better range bands, particularly if we're playing in a radial deployment scenario, and so Nelf is just a relatively natural choice given the options that we've got from the models to pick from. We've then got a Haqqislam Nadir. This is the final piece of our defensive toolkit alongside the Matawiya and etc. This is the ARO, hard ARO defensive piece. It's an ambush model. The Nadir will often deploy somewhere near one of the camouflage markers that's sort of around the midfield, with the idea being that you want to be able to really launch a nasty ambush on something that pushes forward. What you might do, for example, is deploy the Nadir very close to the Sundukbut, have the Nadir in hidden deployment and the Sundukbut be one of a series of camouflage markers, and then at some point where your opponent moves something forward, you drop both of them out of camouflage / hidden deployment and really cut loose. At that point, you've got a Flamen Spear and a Burst 4 AP Spitfire all firing back, and it's terrifying to have to deal with as an ARO. Burst 5 in ARO is terrifying. Finally, we've got the last three Matawiya here, and these are our Jammer Matawiya. We've got one with boarding shotgun and smoke grenades, and then two with just chain rifles. Spare orders in this combat group will mostly be used to either have the Nadir go and do things if it's revealed itself, because it is a specialist, it's a forward observer, or to move any of those Jammer profiles forward into positions where they can be more annoying. Finally, what you can also do is just use the single Matawiya with a jammer and a boarding shotgun and smoke grenades to just let you use your group 2 orders to throw some smoke grenades for your group 1 models. And we will actually be using smoke an awful lot in this list. One of the things that you can see is that all 3 of our active turn guns have got visors of some description. If you've got a visor, you can do some smoke shooting. Even Nauf, who's an MSV1, and the Bokhtar, who's an MSV1, might choose to fire through smoke just because of how strong a negative it stacks onto their opponent. And this is a really good list. Like, it's not perfect. The particular limitation I would note of this list is that it is very light on specialists. There are 2 specialists in the entire list, the Haqqislam Barid and the Nadir, and we're not always going to have an easy time moving either of them forward. And the fact that we might have to reserve the Nadir to do specialist stuff is a little bit non-ideal. You could actually replace the Nadir with any of a number of infiltrating specialists, and you could also quite reasonably turn the Bokhtar into a viral rifle plus light shotgun paramedic profile for scenarios where you need more specialists, but make those adaptations when you know what scenarios you're playing. Overall, this list attacks well and it defends well. It's a nightmare to attack into. It's very good defensively, and it has just a ton of regular orders, plus even 1 tactical awareness, thanks to the combination of Saladin and the Bokhtar. Really, the biggest issue in terms of being a take-all-comers list is just the low specialist count, so adjust for that if you need to. And as far as buy 4 things and have an army, this is one of the strongest armies I could think of. We don't actually really need to go particularly anywhere with this. There are some very natural expansions and things that we will add to this list, but there you go. That's Haqqislam. That's a sick as hell list. I kind of want to play that, and I think I might. But okay, sure, we've bought an initial collection. Even 3 boxes and a blister pack isn't necessarily cheap, but if we enjoy it over time, we will want to expand, so where would we go next? Well, the obvious next choice is to buy one of Haqqislam's flyers. Haqqislam is the only faction in the game that has access to 2 flyers, and I recommend that you only buy one, and therefore that you pick the one that you think looks the best. However, let's not beat around the bush. One of them looks the best, and it's this one, the Zabek Aero Unit. The other one looks like a weird fish, whereas this is a dune ornithopter, and it's fucking sweet. My personal recommendation is that you do consider how you're going to base it. How I have mine based is on a very tall flight stand with the height of a Silhouette 7 model, which is what it actually occupies, etched into the flight stand at the appropriate space. It looks a little bit extra, but very cool, and it really captures the fact that it's a flyer. I haven't found it to be impractical so far either, but I have a lot of weight on the base itself so that it transports easily and doesn't fall over. The reason why I think you probably should only buy 1 flyer, even though you can genuinely run 2 flyer lists, is kind of twofold. The first is just cost, this is not a cheap model. This is a Silhouette 7, relatively large unicool model. It's wonderful to put together. It's a really nice sculpt, but it is expensive. I think mine cost me 80 Australian dollars, and buying a whole second flyer is like, no, just too rich for my blood. The other reason is that double Haqqislam flyers is actually quite a strong list, but it can be very polarizing. Flyers are models that have really high watermark, strongest performance, where they're so mobile and they can be very dangerous and they catch enemies out of cover and they strafe pieces your opponent thinks is safe. And having two of those in the same list if your opponents are unprepared can just absolutely blow them out. There's even some synergy between the two flyers, where the Zabek has Albedo and the Haytham has Mimetism -6, and so they kind of cover each other really nicely. But the bottom end of how flyers perform is that they just get shot and die. They can't take cover, they are Silhouette 7, and canny opponents will know to target them when they get to go first. And what that means in particular when you're starting a faction is that you're exposing yourself to like very polarized game states, and that's never something you want where you're learning and exploring and trying to find out what's cool. If every game that you play just feels like either the Flyers did great or the Flyers died immediately, you and your friends that you're playing against are going to very quickly feel like you found everything that there is to find and there isn't new and novel experiences. And that's kind of a bad way to spend $150 when you could just buy one because it is an awesome model and use one occasionally because it's an awesome profile. And you can really easily use this as both the Zabek and the Haytham. Also, just generally in terms of long-term planning, we have been told that Corvus Belli is looking to be relatively active in keeping Infinity balanced and tuned and adjusting profiles. And right now, as I'm recording this, there's a fair bit of noise in the community about like, hey, maybe the top end of flyers is just a bit too high. Maybe they're just a little bit too lethal when everything goes right for them. And so if I were to read the tea leaves, I would probably say there's a decent enough chance that they'll see some gentle adjustments over time. And that's another situation where if you've gone, holy shit, this is the meta list, I'm buying both of these flyers, the awesome ornithopter and the fish, and you've gone through all of the effort of paying for and then assembling and painting them and down the line, actually taking two of them in a list isn't quite worthwhile anymore. That does not feel particularly good. And so my recommendation is, yeah, you should buy one of these because they're awesome and they're super fun, and the model, particularly for the Zabek, is incredible, but probably not both. The Zabek very easily proxies the Haytham if you wanted to and gives you pretty much everything that you need. And from here, we're actually kind of in a state where there's not really anything else that we need. You could actually just start with all of the first set of purchases that we bought and just play with that for a while, and then eventually buy a flyer to have something else to add to the collection. But in the interest of talking about where we might go from here, I actually think we're in the state at this point where we're just able to make a purchase or two that's best described as the treat yourself purchase. We're in a position where we can buy some models because we think those models are cool, and just give us some options to expand out the force in future, particularly with an eye toward like proxies that might be nice. And so I've got three options that I'm going to propose here, but really in this treat yourself category, it is just, look, if you've got some spare money, if there's a little bit left in the paycheck, and you're having fun with Haqqislam, genuinely pick some models that you think are cool, and that you want to paint and add them to the force. These are presented in no particular order of recommendation, just things that kind of leapt out to me as I was looking at the web store, and actually there are more options even beyond this. This is just to give some direction, but really at this stage we're in the future expansion section. So the first treat yourself option that I thought might be appealing was the Haqqislam expansion pack Gamma. This has got an AR, a Haqqislam for day with boarding shotgun, and Algebel. And if I'm honest, mostly it's the Haqqislam for day with boarding shotgun that I just really like that sculpt. I think it's a really cool pose. I think it absolutely uses style, and I think at this point in your Haqqislam journey, you should be thinking about learning how to use Haqqislam for days. They're a tricky profile to use because they are very single wound, and they will generally, by definition, start really close to your opponent because they're an impersonation troop. And so your opponent will often be really incentivized to try and go after them early in the game and kill them, and that will often be order intensive, but perhaps not order as intensive as you'd like because they're right there in your opponent's deployment zone. And then in your active turn, you've really got to get them into close combat to make good use of them, and so that's got its own challenges. But for all of that, particularly the boarding shotgun profile isn't expensive, and it's worth learning how to use, because if you find that, oh, I've got it, I've figured out how I like to play for days, Only Haqqislam has access to a piece that is an impersonator, that is as good in close combat as a Fide, and is as cheap as a Fide, and it's just worth kind of having in your armory. The AR actually is very good in Hassassin Baram, but also is a great kind of heavy infantry chonky boy, and the dual pistols make him a good proxy for many profiles because it's kind of agnostic, it's not showing off a main gun. You could always just strap, you want to do a conversion, you could strap a main gun across his back, and then Al Jabel is just a cool badass kind of dude. Loads of things you could have Al Jabel proxy as. I'd actually be kind of inclined, if the model allows it, to not put the gun on his back and just have that cool cloak and the claw and the pistol, but there's a few things that you can do there. I think he's a pretty neat profile, a pretty neat model. The profile is garbage, but well, it's too expensive, but we'll not be using him as Al Jabel because we're playing Haqqislam right now and he's not in Haqqislam, but he's a cool model. Our second treat yourself box, option 2, is the Rama Expansion Pack Alpha, and actually we've got a bit of use here for all three of these models. It caught my eye because of the Hunzerkut. The Hunzerkut in vanilla Haqqislam is a really good model to have, and that sculpt is really nice. It's her like laying a deployable repeater. She's got the cool hat and goggles, she's got the cool gun, and the jacket with like the fur kind of lining, that's really sick. And she's very, very good as a cheap, like really cheap specialist. She's cheap because she's a regular, but we're playing Saladin in Haqqislam, so hey, that's useful. We're going to be thinking about proxying and conversion with the other two profiles. For the Alpha Sid, it's a Silhouette 5 or Silhouette 6 model, and so we can use it as an Azrael in vanilla Haqqislam. An Azrael is average at gunfighting but has a very, very dangerous gun. Usually I would take the heavy machine gun. This Alpha Seed would probably proxy a little bit better as the Feuerback, but like much of a muxus, pick your poison. What the Azrael adds to an army is that we've been running all of these Red Furies and Spitfires right now, and they are just low damage. They don't punch through armor. An Azrael punches the hell through armor, and so it's good to have access to a profile like that. The Janissary Hortlak, however, we're going to want to do a little bit of conversion work on, and if you think you're up to it, what I would suggest is like rip the guns off, but in particular the Blitzen he's holding in firing position. Replace that with a cool looking sword. He's an Asawira now. I personally think the Janissary Hortlak is one of the cooler looking heavy infantry in the game because I am a sucker for heavy infantry who are also wearing coats over their power armor. And if we can just genericize his armament a little bit, we can use him as any number of pieces and take advantage of that cool drip. Finally, our third treat yourself option is to just buy the blister pack of 2 Muqtars. This is the sensible option. It allows us to stop proxying using the Moyib as a Muqtar. We get a Muqtar Red Fury, and then in this instance a Muqtar Hacker, which is a very good profile, adds some nice hacking. It's a very solid hacker because it has no incapacitation and high BTS and good willpower, and in vanilla Haqqislam it can duo with another Muqtar, which means that we've got good burst on both of them. The Muqtar Red Fury is actually throwing 5 dice, which is just really nice. This just makes a good duo, and if you don't want the hacker, that Muqtar hacker certainly makes a perfectly serviceable Muqtar Forward Observer. It has the right armament, or Muqtar Doctor. It kind of looks like it's doing doctory things. This is the sensible option, probably also cheaper than either of the 2 other packs, so we're going to assume that we go with this for our next list iteration, but really, again, in this stage, we're in the buy things that we think are cool and awesome section. So this is what a list looks like after purchasing a vehicle and a box of Muqtar. It's time now to give the Sundukbut a rest and focus a little bit more on offense and a bit more in the way of specialist options. This list, unlike the first list, does not struggle too badly for specialists and should be quite good at pressing buttons. The downside is that we are thinning out the defense a little bit. We don't have access to that Sundukbut in the midfield, being that really dangerous total reaction, neurokinetics AP Spitfire, and we've also cut the Hassassin Nadir, so we're really relying on having learned how to use Dalami and Mutawiya to defend at this point, in the hopes of getting more aggressive pieces and specialists into a list. So as before, we begin with Saladin, then we've got now a Muqtar duo using the actual Muqtar models. We're running the Muqtar Hacker and the Muqtar MSV2 Red Fury because we're looking to do a little bit more hacking with this list. We then have the Boktar as before, and we're adding the Zabek. I think the Zabek is probably the better addition to this list because we've got loads of things that are doing smoke shooting and have visors and mimetism, and so the Zabek is a source of additional smoke, but more importantly, it is an Albedo gunfighter who also has ballistic skill attack -3, and those are modifiers that we don't have anywhere else in this list. So there's some really nice just diversity in terms of our offensive options there, whereas if we were to run our vehicle as a Hatham, it would just be one more piece with Mimetism and an MSV, and if our opponent has a counter to those things, then we're just shit out of luck. So a Zabek is a really nice addition to this list. We've then got Zuleika, not Zamira in this list. I still consider her to be very serviceable. She is the weaker of the two twins, and so we're just keeping Zuleika in for now. And then in this list, our Hassassin Barid is playing as a Killer Hacker Barid rather than a regular Barid. The Killer Hacker Barid is a very solid KHD, and we've got regular hacking from the Muqtar. So this is like just a splash hacking where we've got a pitcher and a hacker and a killer hacker, and we can play a little bit in the hacking space if we want. As with the previous list, we've got 4 Matawiya, split 3 and 1. And while we have all of the correct weapon options here, you will need to note of the 2 Ghazis who have jammers, you'll need to tell your opponent which of the jammer-equipped Ghazis is a chain rifle jammer and which of them is a boarding shotgun and smoke grenade jammer. As before, we've still got Nauf. I really like the Lasik model and I want to keep using it. And then 2 Dalami and a Hunzakut. The Hunzakut is to help, well, firstly, it's a midfield specialist, but secondly, the Hunzakut, we're taking the more expensive profile with the deployable repeater. That just helps add a little bit more to our network projection, because the Barid can definitely miss with just ballistic skill 12, whereas the Hunzakut can sneak forward and place a deployable repeater if you want to make hacking attacks on your opponent, particularly closer to their deployment zone. If you want to possess a tag, or use that very solid Trinity -3, which gives an additional -3 to your opponent as a penalty, and really go after some vulnerable hackers that your opponent has, not just relying on the Barid, but actually using some of those group 2 orders to sneak the Hunzakut forward, that's really valuable. We do have to proxy the Hunzakut, but that's fine. We'll use something like the Hassassin Nadir to do it, or even one of the Dalami. There's a Dalami with a rifle and light shotgun, which we've been putting under camouflage marker much of the time so far. There's no reason why we can't use that as a Hunzakut. You could maybe even do a little bit of a kit bashing to show the mines or the deployable repeater, just to make it clear what it is. Now, is this list better than the first list? Realistically, in many respects, it's a side grade. The first list that we put together, I was really happy with. The only notable weakness was that it was limited in terms of specialist, and so certain scenarios it would struggle in. This is more well-rounded, but it trades out some of its defense to get there. It still defends well. We've got hacking and multiple jammers, and multiple midfield pieces with Panzerfausts and light shotguns and boarding pistols. So all of those tools that we've been using so far are still present, and all of the other strengths still exist. Basically, as with the first list, yeah, I'd play this list at an event. It is more well-rounded and more suited to scenario play, and it does bring the power of a vehicle, but otherwise it's still trading very heavily on all of the strengths that we're making great use of with our first list version. And so finally, okay, cool. Well, where do we go from here? Frankly, we're already in the stage of thinking about future expansion with the treat yourself section. The list that we just shown, you could have just about run only having bought the vehicle. And so we're pretty flexible with how we expand out from here, but I have on screen a few of the things that I would at least consider. I think the natural choice for us from here is to actually start thinking about how we might move toward a sectoral in addition to the vanilla Haqqislam that we're already playing. And since we've started with the Hassassin Baram action pack, that's a pretty natural choice. Still, in terms of options that we have on screen now, from left to right, top to bottom, a packet of remotes is always a perfectly serviceable addition to any list. Haqqislam does not need the 7-point repeater remote to be a regular order nearly as much as other factions do, but having a second deployment zone repeater, because Lord knows Saladin doesn't want to be too far forward, is useful to help have your hackers contribute to your defense, and just the general remote package is good to access for lists. They add utility, sometimes you just want things like a sensor remote, and we have enough hacking in Haqqislam that we can put guided missiles into lists if we really want to. Next, we've got McMurrah as a consideration. Now, McMurrah is yes, we are now going to play Hassassin Baram. The only piece that's really missing from what we might want to play Hassassin Baram is McMurrah. He's an awesome model and one of the core strengths as a sectoral. A really dangerous, aggressive, fast attack piece. We don't have access to Zuleika and Zamira, or even any vehicles in Hassassin Baram, but McMurrah combines many of those strengths into a stronger, in many respects, tip of the spear. He can just blow games out by himself, has to get a little bit lucky sometimes to do it, but if you play him enough, you'll have that game where you're just like, Sir, McMurrah has passed his 4th armor roll, and the game is basically, well, not basically done, but he will tend to really blow out a flank and do a bunch of damage. If you want to play Hassassin Baram, here's the first model that you should buy in expanding into the Baram. I've then got Bashi Bazooks. Bashi Bazooks just because you buy two of them in a box, and I think the models are really awesome. And they serve as a great many different things, including Yarn Yarns, which are a warband we might consider from time to time, but also Hassassin Rajiks. They've got the same kind of backpack as a Hassassin Rajik, and just as Bashi Bazooks. One of the limitations of the list that we've had so far is that Saladin is kind of obvious and exposed, and having a model with Hollow Echo and a Hollow Projector can add some confusion to your opponent. Now, there are some slight issues with the rules in terms of how Saladin has a repeater, which makes it sort of easy for your opponent to check whether he exists or not, because repeater area is frequently public information. But at least at deployment, as your opponent is setting up for the first turn, a Bashi Bazooka can add some fuzz to your opponent's information space to make it a little bit trickier for them to know what to do. Also, again, a Bashi Bazooka by itself is a cheap parachutist and can serve well in a variety of lists. We've then got the Xeoden Intervention Troop team, but actually just consider this a placeholder for any cool-looking medium infantry-esque troopers that would form the basis of fire teams in a sectoral. Xeoden don't exist in Hassassin Baram, but in my opinion, they are the coolest looking Haqqislam medium infantry, and so if we bought them, we would use them as proxies for a variety of things. Maybe the rocket launcher is playing, or the missile launcher is playing as a Hassassin Moyib heavy rocket launcher. Maybe the heavy machine gun is playing as a Govad heavy machine gun in Hassassin Baram. Like, there's a variety of options there. You just need access to some dudes who look a little bit more elite, and the Xeoden have sick greatcoats. Bottom row now, on the left, we have Odalisks. I'm a little bit reluctant to recommend these because these are older scopes and go together a little bit more difficult, and they're okay as far as sculpts go. But they would help you expand a little bit into Kopu Kalki, but actually I quite like them in vanilla Haqqislam. Two Odalisks in vanilla Haqqislam as a duo can be point for point durable and give you a low SWC option gunfighting choice with the Viral Marksman. And so they could be a nice addition to add some more regular troopers and a duo option into your list. And then finally, just a tag. There are many cases where a tag is good. The Magari Guard is iconic, and we've been putting expensive things into lists because Saladin is subsidizing them, quite the same way we can subsidize a Magari Guard. It would typically end up displacing both a Boktar and something else, but it's a whole-ass tag. It's got baggage and a mine dispenser if you want one of those, and a big gun, lots of firepower, and it's a truly iconic piece. But you could also consider a Shakush. That's a much lighter weight piece, but fine to include in some lists. Or if we're thinking about expanding into Kopu Kalki, you would definitely want to consider an Iguana, which I believe recently had a resculpt and is an excellent piece and a reason to play Kopu Kalki. Really, at this point, though, the world is your oyster, although I personally recommend expanding into Hassassin Baram and learning how to play things like the really aggressive ambush tactics game. You could also definitely play into Kopu Kalki. Kopu Kalki will give you a more interesting play with the tag and the iguana, and a bunch of interesting options with link teams. You have a lot of different places to go from here. The most important thing to note is that you don't have to move quickly beyond this point. You really only want to pick up new boxes as and when you find they're interesting. You don't need to make aggressive additional investments. We're pretty much set 6 purchases in, and from here we can go wherever it is that we want. We might buy new models occasionally in response to army updates, or because we want to experiment with something, or just because we think the miniatures are cool. So that wraps up this video on how to start collecting Haqqislam. Hope very much that you've enjoyed this, and again, thanks to channel supporter Zero Heretic for the request. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so either by becoming a channel member on YouTube, or you can provide ongoing support or one-off donations via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. It's the support of channel members that enables me to continue making these. Hope very much that you've enjoyed them. We cover both Infinity and other wargames, with a new video just about every week. For those who haven't seen it, there's a narrative campaign that will be beginning soon, and I'm hoping that my video next week will be covering the mission that I wrote for the narrative campaign, talk about how I designed it and how it plays, and get people interested in playing it. Information should be dropping very soon about the narrative campaign, sides will be picked, and let me just say that if there is an option to play as the Hassassin Baram narratively, that's where I'll be going, so this is apropos. Because if the old man of the mountain has 1,000,000 followers, I am 1. If he has 1 follower, I am 1, and if he has no followers, I am dead. So I hope very much you'll join me for the Ruby Monday narrative campaign, and until then, hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time.